So we were the only podcast smart enough to release on Wednesday, at which point we're able to talk about the Preakness field as they'll line up on Saturday. And as I'm saying that, I'm expecting the second we hang up from this podcast, there'll be another major scratch. But Muth is out of the Preakness, who was likely to be favored for Bob Baffert. Obviously changes the complexion of the race. He had speed. Mystik Dan is going to be a much shorter price now. It's great that Mystik Dan is showing up at the Preakness. You know, I appreciate Kenny McPeak having the wherewithal and the patience to step back and say, hey, let's see how the horse trains. Apparently he's training well, so we wish him the best of luck, because how cool would it be to have a Triple Crown on the line at Saratoga at Belmont? Like that place, and by cool, I mean a bit of a shit show, but also very cool. That would be a blast. I don't know, John. I don't know how you feel, but like the way people were talking about Muth, like you would have thought he was like American Pharaoh or something. There was like, it was as if it was like a foregone conclusion that he was going to win this race. And him scratching out, like I didn't love him to begin with. I'm kind of interested in the other Baffert horse, honestly, Imagination now on the outside. But yeah, obviously it takes a main contender out of the race. But I don't know, John, does Muth lay over the field the way people are making it seem?
You know, Joey, I think before I answer that question, I have to ask you a question. Okay.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people, and I'm serious when I ask you this. There were a lot of people on Twitter and on Instagram that were saying, oh, the 150th Derby should have an asterisk next to it because Baffert couldn't run in it and Muth would have, laid over the field and blah, 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 blah. Well, you know what? Muth is out of the Preakness. Does that mean there should be a freaking asterisk next to this race also because that horse can't run in this race? I don't, right. I mean, you could say the same thing, I guess, if that's your logic. That's not my logic, but if that's your logic. Anyway, enough of the negativity and the nonsense that goes on in Twitter sphere that I get sucked into sometimes. I'm really
set your timer for when he comes back.
It's like Swift hitter saying he's not going to be on Twitter anymore, and then like exactly. A day later he shows up, right? Hey, Swifty. Anyway, I think it's going to be a really interesting race. Yeah, it's disappointing that Muth is not running. I'm sincere when I say that because he is a really nice horse. And I would have liked to have seen him run in the race and win, lose, or draw, at least show what he had because he was being pointed for the Preakness race. There's a sneaky horse in here, Joe, that I think that a lot of people are overlooking. I mean, I immediately was drawn to Mystik Dan. I was immediately drawn to Tuscan Gold on the, almost on the far outside. The Chad Brown horse, the Medallia Colt. And you don't see very many Medallia Colts sell for $600,000 anymore. Not the Colts, but he did as a yearling. So he must have been just freaking outstanding looking. A lot of people are also talking about the horse on the way outside, the quote unquote other Baffert horse, Imagination, who also is a really nice horse, never worse than second in 6 starts. But I really like Catching Freedom in this race. I really think that there's a horse that got into a little bit of traffic problems, ran a really credible race in the Derby, only lost to Sierra Leone in the Risen Star, by like a length and a half. What did I say, Rising Star? See, that's on my brain already. Star. And Joe, he is the only horse. Catching Freedom is the only horse in the entire field that has actually won at this distance, at this goofy distance of mile and 3/16. He's the only one. He's run well on the slop. He's an improving horse. Almost every single race he's improved upon based on his numbers. He's won at this distance, and I think he's a sneaky horse that that he's going to be overlooked a little bit because of the excitement of Mystik Dan, rightfully so. And I'm very pleased to see that he's running. And shifting to Mystik Dan, I know Kenny McPeak's initial reaction is, hey, the last time we ran him on 2 weeks rest, he didn't fare very well. But if you really dig deep into those races, it wasn't just so much that he ran twice in 2 weeks. He ran 3 times in 4 weeks at 2 different racetracks. And that's a big ask for a very young horse. That was the first 3 races of his life. He ran a maiden race that he ran second in at Keeneland. Then 2.5 weeks later, they ran him and he won by 7+ lengths, ran a 96 Beyer at Churchill. Then they stepped him up in distance from 5.5 to a mile to 8 furlongs on 2 weeks rest. And he ran kind of a lackluster as the favorite allowance race. But I think that's more of that's a big ask for a 2-year-old to do that. And now he's a 3-year-old. He's a little bit more developed. 7 months can do a lot for a horse between 2 and 3 years old. And I really feel like that I'm hoping that that's the reason why Kenny McPeak finally said, hey, you know what? maybe this horse does deserve the chance to run in the Preakness. But I'm going to stick with my 3-horse Catching Freedom, and I'm looking forward to talking to David about his insight about this race as well.
Yeah, my issue with Catching Freedom, and I think this is the most interesting part of Muth scratching, is not necessarily that he was like this huge favorite, most likely winner. I didn't think so. But he does take speed out of the race. It looks like Baffert's other horse, Imagination, is going to clear from the outside. Catching Freedom's got a lot to do in every single race. He shows up, he makes his run, but he's just going to need a lot of help up front. He cuts back a 16th of a mile, shorter stretch. I think it's typically a more speed favoring track. So obviously I respect him and the way he shows up, but I just think he's going to need too much to go his own way. But I will say, with 2 Dwayne Lucas horses in the race, you got a decent chance of a fast pace, because Dwayne is not one of these guys that likes to have, like Chad Brown, that likes to have his jockeys stand up in the irons and yank back and look like they're downhill skiing on these horses. He wants this horse to show speed. However, they did send Just Steel in the Derby, and that didn't work out too well. He backed up and got a 55 buyer, was beaten a million lengths, and Seize the Gray, not super fast, but should be close enough. So I think that's, and I'm, like you said, I'm interested to talk to David Aragona about this, about what he sees the pace turning out to be, because there was a lot of questions about that in the Derby. I think it was a little faster than we anticipated. The other factor and the other interesting storyline here is this will probably be the last Preakness run at Pimlico as a dump.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
They're supposedly going to start the redevelopment of Pimlico this summer. They say that if all goes to plan, the Preakness will still be held at Pimlico in 2025, which will be the 150th running. And then after that, it would be at Laurel in 2026 and back at Pimlico in 2027. So if you're there, you better appreciate those broken bathrooms and that busted infrastructure, because it ain't gonna be your little mom and pop track anymore. In the next couple of years, they're really going to start to redevelop it and make it into a destination, which I'm really excited for, because Pimlico is an American staple, and so is the Preakness. And for it to have just rotted away that way it has for the last several decades is unfortunate. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this weekend, and I think sometimes the Preakness gets a little overshadowed by the Derby, especially in this era now where it's not guaranteed that a lot of the horses from the Derby will show up. I was watching, we were doing a little podcast for the West Point partners earlier I was doing it with Jason Blewett and Tom Murphy, and Jason wanted us to pull up some our favorite Preakness memories to show and talk about. And mine was the 2007 Preakness, which was when Curlin wore down Street Sense in like a great stretch duel. And I was just thinking about that and how cool it was that the top 3 finishers in the Derby came back in the Preakness, and it wasn't like an aberration. It wasn't like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. That was just the norm. And if you remember, Curlin and Hardspun then also showed up in the Belmont and ran great. And it just, I don't want to be like an old fart here and I like overly traditionalist, but we're losing a little bit of something when we inevitably stretch out the Triple Crown, because that to me stamped those horses as great. And obviously Curlin in particular went on to do many more great things to prove his greatness, and eventually was elected to the Hall of Fame. But it was just after those 3 did what they did in that Triple Crown season, I was like, wow, we are in for a treat with these 3-year-olds and potentially 4-year-olds going forward. Like it doesn't happen anymore. I was pleasantly surprised to see Catching Freedom coming back in this race on 2 weeks rest, and I think relatively speaking, this is a pretty strong field, even with Muth out. Mm-hmm. Definitely stronger than last year's field,
right,
which was pretty much an embarrassment. But it's just, I think this might be one of the last Preaknesses that we have that, as we knew it at the old crusty Pimlico 2 weeks after the Derby. I think it's going to look a lot different in the near future, for better and for worse.
No question about that, Joe. And you bring up some really good points about, is the old girl still going to be around? Is it going to be a facelift, or is it going to be a complete reconstruction deal? I remember when Atlantic City was closing and when Garden State Park was closing, a different story, not being refurbished, and people were coming in on the last day with tool belts, with literally tool belts, with electric screwdrivers and saws and hammers and crowbars to get a piece of memorabilia. Do you think that's going to happen this weekend with the Preakness? Do you think people are going to start taking some seats home with them?
He sees a picture of like some guy walking out with like one of those porta potties on his back.
Well, that happens
That's
anyway.
the biggest landmark at Pimlico as it currently stands, is the freaking porta potties in the infield.
I always laugh. I always laugh when they show this on the internet, when guys try to run across like 50 of the porta potties and people just start hammering them with beer.
Full beer, not empty beer cans, full.
It's just, it always cracks me up. I always have like a race announcer in my head going, and they're off, and he makes it through the first 10 without incident. Oh, he gets hit by a tall boy, and he's down, and he gets back up. Like it goes through my head when those guys try to do it, and every now and then a guy makes it, and every now and then a guy falls through the ceiling of one of those and comes out blue. It's just
honestly, like Pimlico is the Preakness Day at Pimlico on the infield. That's like, not to be morbid, but that's one of those instances, like the running of the bulls, where I'm like, how does like 10 people not die doing this every single year? Like,
exactly. And
extreme sport.
And it seems like it's always the same guy, but it's not. It's just a younger version of him. It's like Stupid Drunk Guy 2.0, Stupid Drunk Guy 3.0. It's like they keep getting rebooted, but they have the same issue with their software.
Exactly. Well, how about the OG, the greatest vintage of those guys was a dude who tried to punch Artax.
Yeah. You know, I just looked that up the other day when I was wondering. It was like on one of the undercard races, and basically he thought he was going to be a matador, right? And try to punch the horse. He stood there and tried that was the weirdest thing ever. And he's like, for a couple of years he was kind of like famous because of it, and then he's fallen into anonymity, as it were.
So the moral here is maybe a little more separation from the new Pimlico infield and the track.
Yep.
That might be one of the lessons from the Preakness. But it is one of those unique things in racing, and we have like fewer and fewer of these where it's the place to be. Even if it's the place to go get wasted and make an ass of yourself, it's the place to be at a racetrack in America, and we have fewer and fewer of those. Yeah. So I hope that with the new Pimlico, there is a little bit more better security, better infrastructure, but I hope they don't get rid of the party atmosphere that they do have at the Preakness, because it is one of a kind, and we're looking forward to it on Saturday.